So about a year ago, I did a review on Stalker Anomaly, which is a standalone mod that's so popular it outshines its source material. Even if you're not a Stalker fan, you've probably come across Anomaly or one of its offshoots like Gamma or Escape from Pripyat one way or another. As a result, Anomaly for many has been their first experience with the zone, for better or for worse. I've always had a sort of love-hate relationship with this mod, and the last video I made on it left me pretty frustrated, so I took a break for a while. But with the recent release and relative disappointment that is Stalker 2, as well as a few new add-ons releasing for Anomaly itself, I wanted to revisit Stalker's most popular mod and do a sort of updated review. Leave a like if you enjoy, and let's get into it. So Anomaly first and foremost is a hardcore free-play mod, where the story and scripted quests take a backseat, with the mod instead emphasizing randomly generated dynamic quests, and expanding upon basic survival elements of the OG games, making things like weapon maintenance, hunger, and managing injuries a lot more important and in-depth. Everything is deadlier in this mod. NPCs are much more accurate, they'll engage you at far greater distances than before, and supplies are scarce to say the least, with things like artifacts and armor receiving huge nerfs. Gone are the days of wearing an exosuit with a full belt of radiation-reducing artifacts while taking on hordes of mutants in the open and living to tell the tale. In Anomaly, Stalker's usual difficulty is increased quite drastically, to the point where the vanilla games end up looking comparatively easy. The pace of everything, aside from the player's death, is slowed down. Movement is slower, and sprinting head-on into or away from a fight will more often than not have you falling face-first into fields of anomalies that are both more numerous and significantly more lethal than their vanilla counterparts. Scavenging is no longer as simple as picking up a case of ammo here or a medkit there. In Anomaly, scavenging largely consists of picking up seemingly useless junk items or broken weapons that can be disassembled into crafting ingredients and made into something useful later on, providing the player has obtained the proper crafting tools and recipes to make those useful items. Yes, it's kind of a headache, and yes, this mod, for those of you who didn't know, has a crafting system, which isn't all that surprising once you learn that Anomaly started off as a passion project made by a Minecraft developer. Coming back to Anomaly from the simplicity of vanilla Stalker and other mods like IWP or Global War had me rolling my eyes at said crafting system. I can appreciate what the devs were trying to do here, and in a way, it is kind of cool as an option. But especially early game, the crafting system ends up feeling mandatory, confusing, and extremely out of place. I found myself spending a lot of time flicking through menus and reading guides rather than playing what is supposed to be a horror FPS, and thus the crafting system is my first and probably one of my biggest major gripes with this mod. Even once you get past the early game, it still ends up feeling, if not mandatory, at the very least highly encouraged. As if your gear gets too damaged and you don't want to use the crafting and repair system, paying a technician NPC to do it for you is often so costly you might as well just buy new gear altogether, which, for me at least, just isn't fun. And then there's the general maintenance. In vanilla Stalker, your gear takes damage. This is to be expected, of course. After all, you're trudging through a radioactive exclusion zone full of swamps, random fireballs, and very angry kitty cats that want to rip your organs out of your body and use them as a chew toy. So it's understandable that you can't just run around like Master Chief in Mark 6 Mjolnir armor and blast away at everything with no consequences. Or can you? Well, not an Anomaly, but an IWP on the other hand. Okay, that's a different video entirely. But jokes aside, Anomaly has a lot of different items, in fact, way too many. The item bloat is palpable, and among this bloat you'll find lots of little glue tubes or sprays or repair kits to be used to keep your gear in top shape, thus saving you from having to pay a costly visit to a technician. The only problem is that all of these items have a hard limit on if you can use them or not based on the condition of your gear. What this means is that if your weapon or suit dips below 85 or 90% durability, you're out of luck. You then have to go visit the technician's workbench, and depending on how below the higher percentages you go, you could be spending a substantial part of your in-game currency. There are a few items that can be used at lower percentages, but they are, to be expected, rare and quite costly themselves. This design choice around gear and weapon maintenance is certainly interesting. From a realism standpoint, it makes perfect sense. If a giant mutated two-headed cat thing pounces on you and rips your chest rig open, a small amount of glue isn't going to be able to fix that. But on the other hand, from a gameplay enjoyment standpoint, it just isn't fun. Having to stop constantly after every single firefight to check your gear or weapons and then inevitably having to spend some time clicking through options in the UI to repair said weapons interrupts the flow of the rest of the game. I've literally had moments where I end up having to stop mid-firefight just to click some buttons, go through an animation where my character's hands are hidden from the screen while some sound effects play, and this happens quite often. Some may call it immersive, but I think it's tedious, and it's something I've never gotten used to. Well, you do have the option not to perform field maintenance and wait until you can get back to a base so you can click even more UI buttons and repair your gear more extensively. It's not exactly what I have in mind when I think of playing Stalker. A big thing here I have to stress is that none of this was in the original games, and it doesn't make an appearance in the vast majority of other mods either, hence why it feels so out of place. Normally your armor or weapon gets torn up, and you just go to the nearest technician and pay a modest fee to get it repaired. Maybe some mods have repair kits that are simple and easy to use, just a few clicks, and your weapon or piece of armor is done. I like the concept of being able to do your own repairs, but I would much rather see this simplified version of things, with just those generic repair kits lying about, rather than this complicated mess of menus and components and repair and disassembly tools that Anomaly has. I know there are add-ons that adjust and tweak this, but I'm going to talk about those more in a bit. The next thing I wanted to address is a really simple but annoying thing with Anomaly, and that is the movement speed. As I mentioned at the start of this video, it's quite a bit slower than its vanilla counterpart, and I hate mods that do this. Anomaly is far from the first mod to lower movement speed, and I get why. Vanilla movement speed is way too fast, but a mod like this that requires constant backtracking due to the reliance on dynamic quests that will have you trudging through the same levels over and over again, it just doesn't mix well with reduced movement speed. Slowing down the movement speed that much just kills it for me. With mods that do it, I usually just end up editing the actor LTX file to make the speed a little bit more in line with the original games. I actually experimented quite a bit this time around and found a sprint speed somewhere between the snail's pace Anomaly offers and what the vanilla games have, and overall I found the mod a lot more enjoyable, but trying to play Anomaly over the years with its stock movement speed was just a slogfest. And it's not just the speed itself either. Anomaly, for some reason, lowers the default amount of weight you can carry, and yes, I know it's adjustable in the menus, but I'm just going off the normal difficulty settings here, trying to judge the game based off the way the developers intended it to be played. By default, Anomaly, despite all the item bloat, does not allow you to carry much before your character starts to fatigue, so you have all these new items, but a more limited carry weight than you do in vanilla. And this means that you'll find yourself constantly over-encumbered, out of breath, downing caffeine tablets, energy drinks, and Hercules. Again, I'm going to talk more about add-ons later in the video, but yeah, Anomaly needs tweaks to movement speed to be enjoyable, at least for me. And that brings me to my next problem. The quests, or really lack thereof. By default, Anomaly has a few scripted quests that are basically just a rehash of the original game's storylines. Other than that, it's all just go here, go there, randomly generated tasks. There are mods that add on to this, but like I said, I'm talking just about default Anomaly here. This game is tedious. The amount of times I've been given a task from duty in Rostock to fight bandits in the same part of the truck cemetery is mind-numbing. And this isn't just an issue relegated to duty or the truck cemetery either. This happens all across the zone. It doesn't matter what map you're on, it doesn't matter what faction it is, what set of circumstances, there's a lot of repetition in Anomaly's dynamic quests. And the thing is, that's not as much of a problem with other modern free play mods. They don't have this as so much of an issue. It kind of baffles me how Anomaly is the most popular free play mod given that fact. If you take a look at something like Call of the Zone, you get a lot more dynamic quests right out of the box. Then you can take something like Team Light, another highly underrated mod that I would recommend. In Team Light, you've got better dynamic quests, and a decent amount of scripted ones with new characters, new things to do, and actual storylines. It's really cool, and the fact that Anomaly doesn't have any of this by default is a bit perplexing. Then there's the gameplay itself. In Stalker Anomaly, everything is hyper-aggressive and wants to kill the player. Not in the normal Stalker way either. In Vanilla Stalker and most other mods, there's a sort of nuance to the world. Oftentimes in regular Stalker, you'll see mutants running off in the distance, and if you don't interact with them or get close to them, they probably won't go after you. You'll have boars, fleshes, packs of dogs that run around in a sort of frenzied panic. Sometimes they interact with each other, they'll fight, they'll just roam aimlessly, maybe they'll roam into an anomaly and get sucked up by it. This is a big part of what made the original Stalker's world so convincing and immersive. The appearance that not everything was centered around the player, that the player didn't really need to interact with things at all. There was this living, breathing world that wasn't just you. There was more to it than just constant tension and stimulation. In classic Stalker, just as often as there were action sequences, there were also these quiet moments where you could just sit back and observe the zone living without your input. And that made the tense encounters with mutants, or the high-stakes firefights with other Stalkers, that much more meaningful. While this certainly still exists in Anomaly to some extent, it's largely diminished as mutants will, more often than not, go out of their way to track the player across an entire map. Dogs no longer regularly scatter and flee at the sound of gunshots. They just charge straight in. Cats will fly across the map like a cruise missile to reach their target, which more often than not will be the player or one of their companions. Compare this to the dogs in the original game as an example. Here we can see a pack of them just milling about. They don't get aggressive or approach me until I get very close. If these same dogs were an Anomaly, the majority of the time they would do their best to make their way across the entire map to get to me. It wouldn't matter if I was in a building talking to a trader, out in an open field, or just minding my business having just spawned into a new level. The AI are flat out too aggressive sometimes, especially with the more quote-unquote normal mutant types. In the vanilla games and many other mods, this is flipped, with mutants like dogs, boars, and fleshes generally being a bit more passive unless somehow provoked. While Anomaly's hyper-aggressive AI can lead to some pretty interesting encounters, oftentimes it just ends up being frustrating when a mutant from half a map's distance away just shows up behind you. Take this clip here where I was sneaking through the bandit base when suddenly a horde of boars I had encountered minutes earlier decided to rush the entire compound. It didn't feel immersive at all. It just felt like unnecessary difficulty and a disruption to what I was doing in the gameplay. Couple these surprise enemies with the annoying repair mechanics I talked about earlier, and it makes for a less enjoyable experience where you'll regularly find yourself in a situation where you get ambushed by heat-seeking cats or nomadic bloodsuckers who did more damage to your suit of armor than is worth repairing. So instead, you just pause the game and load your last save. That's not challenging, that's not true to Stalker's original formula, and most of all, it's just not fun. It's tedious and irritating. Gameplay aside, I wanted to talk about what may be a bit of a nitpick, and that is the visuals of Anomaly. They're inconsistent at best and ugly at worst. Sometimes Anomaly can be a really good looking mod, especially on certain maps, but for some reason others look awful. For some reason the developers of Anomaly made everything related to the natural environment this muted, washed out brown color. Let's look at the level Zaton, for example, in the original game versus Zaton in Anomaly. The level takes place in a dried up lake bed where one could expect a lot of sand and different varieties of flora. In the original game, it depicts that pretty well. You've got a nice variety of gold-colored reeds, light-colored sand, dark shrubs, and mud, and pretty nice textures on the ground considering the game is as old as it is. In Anomaly, however, everything is just this hideous dark mud color with little variation. It's just very unappealing to look at. And then you have the inconsistencies. For some reason, grass on Anomaly is scarce and patchy, even when you turn the grass slider up in the settings. This is especially true when you compare it to other mods like Lost Alpha or even the original games. So you'll end up having these really highly detailed buildings with great texturing, and then this flat, bland looking ground with lots of dirt and only a few patches of grass. This becomes especially apparent the further north you go for some reason, with certain levels like Zaton, Jupiter, and Pripyat hardly having any grass at all, leading to Anomaly's version of the zone looking like a giant mud pit rather than a place that's long abandoned and overgrown. Another inconsistency that's almost comical to me is how bad some of the NPCs look. You'll be wandering around looking at vehicles and crates and what's a pretty decently textured terrain, and then you'll encounter an NPC that looks like he walked straight out of a game from 2005. This was kind of an issue in the OG Stalker games as well, so I can't fault Anomaly too hard here, But it's weird to me that you see so many graphical mods, screenshots, Reddit posts, and YouTube thumbnails that depict Anomaly looking like a next-gen game when the characters look like this. I think a lot of Anomaly's appeal is less so about the gameplay and more so about this overhyping that tends to happen, where a lot of people post these flashy images that are taken at just the right angle, under just the right weather, with just the right lighting, and flashy titles like, "This free game does what AAA can't." In reality, Anomaly is what I call sort of the Instagram model of Stalker mods, so to say. The people posting these heavily edited, hyped up clickbait photos don't tell you that the game doesn't look like that out of the box. They don't tell you have to install loads of add-ons to get it to have those visuals, and you need to also have a really high-end PC to boot if you want to run them at any decent frame rate. They sell an image, so to say, almost literally. And that brings me to my next point. Anomaly isn't a bad mod overall. I mean, it does work, and if you're someone who wants a hardcore themed experience, then it might be your favorite mod ever. But other than that, it doesn't do anything particularly new or unique. It isn't some massive, groundbreaking mod like a lot of these titles and thumbnails would have you believe. It doesn't blow all the other mods out of the water generally. It doesn't really have a particularly compelling story. And aside from the crafting system, there isn't much in the way of new game mechanics, and content-wise, Anomaly is basically Call of Chernobyl, which is another mod that came out a decade ago. I just made some people, including myself, feel a bit old. My issue is, Anomaly is often touted as being the definitive Stalker experience. You can find video after video after video on YouTube saying, "This is it, this is the mod you have to be playing, it's the best that there is," and I've even seen some people go as far to say that the original games aren't worth touching due to how dated they are, which couldn't be further from the truth. The original games are fantastic in their own right, and there are so many other mods out there that have more to offer than Anomaly and don't require nearly as much tweaking to get it to be an enjoyable experience. The original games have an actual proper story. They've got loads of scripted quests as well as dynamic ones. There's unique loot, weapons, items, characters, and an actual sense of direction. And you still have freedom, player choice in that open world in those games. Then you have other mods like IWP that has a much more expanded sandbox than Anomaly, and better sound effects, visuals, and item animations right out of the box. No add-ons required. Then there's something like Global War, which contains more factions and new maps than I can count. Don't even get me started on OP2, which is an insanely big mod. Then you have story mods like Incubator or True Stalker, which are a bit on the shorter side, but they're both fantastic. All of these things exist, yet Anomaly, or worse, its even more hardcore offshoot called Gamma, gets all the attention and praise despite not bringing all that much to the table other than the hardcore difficulty and occasionally flashy visuals. Now the last thing I wanted to touch on, which I've mentioned briefly a couple times here, is the add-ons. Anomaly is kind of miserable to play without them. From the tedious crafting and repair systems, the random bugs, the lack of any real innovation, or the absurdly difficult loot pool base Anomaly has, it just makes it kind of a chore to play. There's a reason why when it was released back in 2018 before all the add-ons came out, it had kind of a mixed reception. It wasn't all that popular in the Stalker modding space. It didn't really get popular until around 2020 when a bunch of mod packs came out for it, and then it blew up in the YouTube algorithm. Add-ons and mod packs are, for better or worse, what has made Anomaly as popular as it is today. I'm not hating on the people who made them or the base mod. At the end of the day, it's a cool passion project, and, you know, who am I to tell people what to make and what not to make? I'm just saying that it's not the definitive best Stalker experience that people make it out to be, especially not on its own without add-ons. And unfortunately, many of the add-ons over the years only do very minor things, and don't add much in the way of actual content, aside from a few, many of which are more recent. In the footage you're seeing with this video, I've installed things like the DLTX Minimod pack, which in my mind is absolutely essential, as it allows you to tweak things like the absurdly low spawn rate of medkits. I also installed new levels, which I've covered on this channel in the past. It adds in new areas for the player to explore, as well as some pretty decent scripted quests, which I mentioned before Anomaly is sorely lacking. And then there's the latest add-on I discovered, the Respawn Mutant Collection, which is probably, in combination with the new levels add-on, my favorite one thus far. It adds in loads of new creatures, both hostile and neutral, into the zone. Like I talked about earlier, almost everything in Anomaly is excessively hostile, so having some truly passive creatures brings back the feel of a believable and realistic world to the game, which is actually really nice. The tension and sense of unease you feel as you see a large creature emerge from the bushes, walking towards you menacingly, only to realize it's just a peaceful deer, adds a lot to the game's sense of immersion. Well, except for when they just stand around in the middle of a firefight and don't react to all the gunshots going off. That's not typical deer behavior, but it's a bit jarring, but overall, I actually really came to enjoy Anomaly with these add-ons, like I never have before. But the frustrating thing is that the issues I mentioned that are part of the base mod were still there, and they're kind of hard to overlook, and that's really my main issue here. Even if I could install more add-ons to mod those things out or change them to better suit my tastes, I don't really have time for that. I've got things to do outside of gaming, and I don't have time to spend hours searching ModDB for add-ons to make the game enjoyable. I don't have enough time to go through every README, and I certainly don't want to install any of the various hardcore mod packs either. I like something that's playable and enjoyable right out of the box. That's why as I bring this video to a close, I would like to recommend 2 other free play mods and the videos I've made on them. A common thing I hear when discussing the many shortcomings of Anomaly is that most people who dislike stock Anomaly play Old World add-on, which I actually did a video on way back when it released. However, while that's certainly a decent option, it feels a bit too vanilla for my liking, and suffers from a lot of the same repetitiveness Anomaly does. So instead, I would like to recommend a mod called Team Light, which is, as mentioned earlier, a sort of vanilla plus plus styled mod with dynamic quests, new weapons that fit right in with the original sandbox, custom NPCs, and gameplay that's a bit more complicated than vanilla, but much simpler than Anomaly. A happy medium between the two, so to say. Now, if you're looking for something that's more similar to Anomaly in terms of gunplay and gameplay, with a more modern and realistic approach, check out IWP. With 1 or 2 simple, easy to install add-ons, you'll have a great time without all the complexity and tediousness of Anomaly. No crafting system, no overpriced items, just classic Stalker fun with a bit of a modern twist. Comes complete with item animations, a new weapon sandbox, an upgraded engine, and even, yes, the aforementioned Halo armor as an Easter egg. It does sadly lack new levels and new mutants, but the gameplay loop is satisfying enough, and the new weapons and dynamic quests it adds more than warrant a playthrough if that's what you're looking for. But that is going to be it for me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, it helps the channel out a lot, and lets me keep making videos like this one. The links for the add-ons I mentioned, as well as IWP and Team Light, will be in the description, so definitely check those out if you're looking for something like that. And let me know your thoughts on Anomaly in the comments below, and tell me some other mods you think I should check out. You never know, your recommendation could end up having me make a video about your favorite mod. That's actually how my Global War video got made. Somebody commented, they said, hey, check this out, and I checked it out and made a video, and it's actually a lot of fun. But again, that's it for me, and thank you for watching as always, and have a great day, stay safe, and get out of here, Stalker.